big changes. Big changes are coming live just about now in NA and tomorrow in EU. We are getting some changes to Spires of Ascension and Sanguine Depths, changes to Plaguefall, and very many changes to Necrotic Wake. When it comes to the raid, to Castle Nathria, Council of Blood has been changed below Mythic difficulty, and then Sludge Fist has been nerfed, as well as many changes, many nerfs to Stone Legion Generals. So when you look at dungeons first, if you were to be asked which are the harder dungeons, which dungeons should have been tuned because they're very frustrating and much more difficult than the rest on average, most people would tell you Necrotic Wake and Sanguine Depths. So Blizzard is going to address these two dungeons in this set of changes, as well as Plaguefall and slightly Spires of Ascension. The first change, though, that Blizzard is pushing for Mythic Plus is that the Manifestation of Pride now sees through stealth and invisibility effects. Now, for 99% of groups, this is useless. You don't really see what's the point in this, especially now that we have the MDI running, that you have seen these groups clearing these dungeons. You can see that sometimes Prideful is pointless, sometimes you don't want to take the time to kill it. Sometimes you're just not able to make Prideful line up with some very good pulls. So what do is you simply reset it and skip it. Particularly good since most groups right now in Mythic Plus, of course, are going Alliance because of Shadow Meld. So this, together with things like Shroud, can give you the ability to simply ignore whichever Manifestation of Pride you want. This time, though, with this change, is going to make it quite more difficult to skip a Prideful proc whenever you want. Now, instead, when we look at the targeted dungeon changes, let's start with a smaller one, which is from Spires of Ascension. Spires of Ascension, as you know, when we have categorized a dungeon, is a fortified dungeon. Is a dungeon with the harder part of the dungeon made harder by fortified, by the trash. Spires of Ascension has already been nerfed a few weeks ago in its trash by quite a lot to make it much more manageable now. So this is a surprising change because it further nerfs the trash part of Spires of Ascension, because the last three adds, the last three trash, are getting nerfed. Now their oppression debuff, which would stack up your damage taken over time, has been nerfed by 50%. Instead of gaining 2% more damage taken per application, now you're only gaining 1%. This is going to further simplify the harder part of Spires of Ascension, which was the trash, and no boss has been touched on Spires of Ascension so far. Looking at other dungeons with way more changes, we can start with Plaguefall. Now, Plaguefall, I'm really surprised that Domina has managed to dodge another round of nerfs. Maybe it's because her adds spawn in stealth and she's just perma-stealthed from Blizzard or something, because Plaguefall has gotten a nerf just to Stradama. So let's go with the bigger change, which is the reduced cast frequency of Infectious Rain during her final phase. I think this is going to total, on Tyrannical, where the fight is longer, you can expect the fight to be longer, to 2 less casts of Infectious Rain, which is massive. And then another major problem at higher keys on Tyrannical is the Plaguebound Devoted, and now it has gotten health and damage reduced by 40%. This is one of those very tricky mobs, because at lower keys people will get a bad vice. They will get the dangerous impression that you can just ignore these because the boss is, it's easy, it's quick, it's not that difficult, so you just ignore them, you run around and you avoid them. But then eventually, the higher you go in keys, you will actually have to start killing them. People are not used to this, they don't respect this mob, and eventually when you have to dodge the tentacles, you will find yourself in a situation where you run past one of them and he one-shots you. So this nerf is going to make it easy both ways. It's going to hit for less, and now it's also going to be much easier to kill. The other nerf is slightly adjusting the timing of Plague Crush so that there is a little more time between tentacle slaps. I don't think this is going to change too much, because people who failed tentacles are going to continue failing tentacles. People were failing tentacles at the release of the expansion, and now this is the second or the third round of nerfs to the tentacles. I don't think that's the main issue on the Stradama fight. Now on to the big two. The big two dungeons that have been changed, Sanguine Depths and Necrotic Wake. Now, unlike Plaguefall, unlike Spires of Ascension, we can't really start pinpointing the more annoying part of Sanguine Depths. People could legitimately tell you every single boss on Tyrannical, their personal worst part of the dungeon. Other people could tell you certain trash. Certainly the entire gauntlet at the end would have been one of the main answers by most people. So pretty much any nerf on this dungeon would have been received favorably. So what gets nerfed in this dungeon is going to be bosses, Crixis and Tarvold. So Crixis is getting the Severing Smash and Essence Absorption nerfed by 20%. So in the higher keys on Tyrannical, it has gotten to the point where it is actually easier for you to not even bother soaking the orbs. What you can do when you fight Crixis is to tank him against the wall where he is, stack together next to the wall when he's doing the explosion with the orbs, and then run and kite him on the other side of the corridor. So the orbs are going to keep chasing you, but never reach the boss. And by the time the orbs have reached the opposite side of the corridor, a second set of orbs is spawning, at which point, again, you hug against the wall, you wait for the orbs to spawn, and then you run the boss all the way back to the other side of the corridor. So now you have two sets of orbs chasing the boss, never actually exploding. So technically speaking, if you were doing that strategy, the essence absorption damage reduction nerf actually is not going to impact you at all, because you weren't planning on blowing up any of the orbs, except for the tank orb, which is just one, so it's not that major. The Severing Smash is okay, it's helpful, but it wasn't the main issue of the fight, so it's gonna help, sure, but you are more worried about soaking the orb explosions or even the charges than the Severing Smash damage. The other nerf to this dungeon has gone to Executor Tarvold. Tarvold has already been nerfed once, but the fleeting manifestation, the ad, that pulls his damage was basically untouched. So now it is getting a 20% health nerf. So this was one of the main problems of the fight, the damage that you would get when the ad would spawn and having to kill it very, very quickly. So this is certainly going to help. The fight still remains very annoying because of things like camera angles in a tight corridor where you have to look around left and right for the rotating spheres. So it will remain a very annoying fight, but at least it's going to be made easier by this change. But these were just snacks. They were just previews of the major nerf that has happened in dungeons, which is to the Necrotic Wake. So, Necrotic Wake has gotten a massive amount of nerfs to their trash, first of all. You can already tell what's the situation in a dungeon when one of the first fixes is that the Kyrian armaments you can fight in the dungeon are now going to persist through death. So, it is so expected for people to die in this dungeon that now they're even going to give you your Kyrian buffs and make them persist after death. So when it comes to the trash though, every one of the brittle bone spawns, every one of the brittle bone skeletons that you pull with the Necromancer have gotten their damage nerfed. 20% on the crossbowman, 20% on the warrior, 20% on the Frostfall volley, and the cast has been slowed from 2.5 to 3.5 seconds. So now you have even less of an excuse to let this be cast in the first place. The single target Frostbolt also has been nerfed by 36%, as well as slower cast as well, from 2 seconds to 2.5 seconds. The main mini-boss, which you could just skip already, and it is recommended to do so, Narzuda, the one before the bridge, has gotten its health nerfed by 20%. The Skeletal Monstrosity, right after the bridge, after Narzuda, the Big Skelly has gotten its health reduced by 20% and the melee damage reduced by 25%. But now, onto the big stuff. Onto the big stuff because the Corpse Harvester has gotten its health reduced by 29% together with the Corpse Collector. So the two guys, the guys that cast things like Drain Fluids, that cast things like Gore Splatter, the tough casts that you have to interrupt. Now they are much faster to kill. The Stitch Vanguard health has been reduced by 14%, the Loyal Creation by 24%, and the Kyrian Stitchwork health reduced by 25% and melee damage reduced by 17%. So the big fat abominations also have gotten health nerfs, particularly. So pretty much all of the more annoying parts of the trash have gotten nerfed. The pools with the skeletons where you have to kill the Necromancer, and now the more threatening caster mobs have gotten their health reduced heavily, and then the tank buster abominations have gotten nerfed as well. So across the board, trash is now much more simple in Necrotic Wake. So this set of nerf could change Necrotic Wake from a terrible key overall to one of those hard keys but just on Tyrannical. Now, what have they gotten in terms of nerfs to bosses? So this one I don't agree with. I think it's excessive, Blightbone. The Carrion Worn stacks required to trigger the eruption went from 3 to 5. I don't think this is necessary. You have to literally be asleep to let one of these hit you for 5 times, so I think this is probably overcompensating for letting Necrotic Wake be so hard for so long. They just threw in an extra nerf that wasn't needed. More nerfs to Amarth. So Amarth was extremely difficult before when the extra damage increase, the AoE damage increase Amarth would gain from every round of Final Harvest. Every time he would cycle the ad spawn, he would be gaining more and more damage. They nerfed it to only last for like 30 seconds. So every time there was a new spawn of ads, he would reset his damage increase. And now it's going to be nerfed even more. Reducing the range the skeletons are summoned during Land of the Dead. This was already partially possible if you tanked Amarth in the corner of the room, meaning he had an entire part of the room where he couldn't possibly spawn the ads. So it made it much easier for you to group them together. Unholy Frenzy attack speed bonus has been reduced by 20%. This is not very major because you can just Dispel Enrage, and considering how popular Balanced Druids, even Resto Druids, as well as Marksmanship Hunters are currently in Mythic Plus, this was rather simple to remove rather quickly. And then similar nerfs to the Brittlebone Skeletons, the ones from the Trash, which are very similar, pretty much the same to the reanimated version of Mart. The Warrior and the Crossbowmen, just like the Trash mobs, have gotten their damage reduced by 20%. Crossbolt Volley damage has been reduced, and the cast time has been increased. So pretty much the same. And lastly, when it comes to bosses in Necrotic Wake, Stitch Flesh has gotten its Embalming Ichor duration reduced to 1 minute, previously 6. So previously, the room was going to get pretty much filled with this. Now it's going to last just 1 minute, which is actually a surprisingly good change because eventually on Tyrannical it's going to be harder and harder for you to line up the stitchwork to hook the boss because the center of the room is going to get filled with this slime on the ground. So it's going to allow you to maneuver around the room a little bit better now that it expires after 60 seconds. And with this, we have all the changes for dungeons. It is clear, of course, that they were targeting the Necrotic Wake the most, and in Sanguine Depths, the main problem they targeted were the bosses to be tuned, and even on Plaguefall for Stradama. Heavier tuning towards bosses is particularly good that this happens in the week that we're getting right now for Tyrannical. So we're going to get a much heavier workload of players testing all these changes now that we're entering a Tyrannical week. Now, the other set of changes is going to be focused on raids. Now, for the raid encounters, Council of Blood is a minor set of nerfs, mostly to the scaling. Dreadbolt Volley and Drain Essence from Frida and the Dark Recital from Stavros have gotten changed. The Volley and the Drain Essence have gotten reduced damage up to 20% based on the raid sizes. So smaller groups are going to have an easier time with these two abilities. Not that they were a major problem in this fight anyways. And then Dark Recital has gotten its duration reduced by 1 second in normal and heroic difficulties. The bigger changes are to Sludge Fist and Stone Legion, of course also because they affect Mythic. So Sludge Fist has gotten Chain Slam and Chain Bleed damage reduced by 35%, and then Colossal Roar reduced by 10%. So the bigger change here is of course Colossal Roar. Chain Slam and Chain Bleed are very, very minor. The amount of damage and the importance of this ability is very reduced compared to something like Colossal Roar. There is also the fact that if you were playing with a specific strategy, Chain Slam and Chain Bleed weren't even a problem. A viable strategy for Sludge Fist is to simply let the guy solo the Chain Slam. If you're lucky, you're going to get Chain Slam on something like a mage, something like a hunter, that can simply immune and ignore the Chain Slam, or you could be doing something like Ancestral Protection Totem from a Restoration Shaman to let the guy die on his own so that you don't have to stack on the guy with Chain Slam to spread the damage taken. You simply let him die on his own and then he gets rest by the totem, or straight up use a combat rest for this. So the damage reduction to Chain Slam and Chain Bleed, I guess, is going to help all the groups that are not going for this type of strategy. You know, it's going to help, it's going to punish less people who have to soak this while the group is not topped in HP. You have to go in to help with the soak, but you have 55% HP, so it's very risky. This is going to help you, definitely, avoiding, you know, one-shots and people dying from this. Although this doesn't happen that often. Ideally, even if you have very few amount of immunities and you know, this type of cheat mechanics, it's gonna happen 3 or 4 times at best throughout the entire encounter. Colossal Roar overall is a bigger problem in this fight, which is also why the nerf is much smaller to Colossal Roar. However, we do have to look at the bigger set of changes, which is to Stone Legion. I am happy that Stone Legion is being changed this much because I highlighted the problem with Mythic progression. This was the video from a few days ago, but the result updated to today is still the same. You can see that the amount of guilds that kill Sludge Fist compared to the amount of guilds that kill Stone Legion compared to the ones that kill Denatrius. You see the very close amount of guilds that kill Denatrius right after killing Stone Legion. Of the 77 guilds killing Stone Legion, 52 already killed Denatrius. Meanwhile, when you look at Sludge Fist, of the 257 guilds killing Sludge Fist, only 77 have killed Stone Legion. Stone Legion was a heavy block in the progression. Council of Blood was the previous block in the mid-tier range of guilds, and then for the highest ranks of progression, Stone Legion was the next. So Blizzard went down with the Mega Hammer of nerf. First you have some flat-out nerfs. Stone Legion Goliath, the ad that spawns every time, as its health reduced by 10% in Mythic difficulty, as well as the Stone Legion Skirmisher's health reduced by 6% on Mythic. The Goliath also has the cooldown of Ravenous Feast increased by 6 seconds of Mythic. The Serrated Tear and Stone Fist have gotten their damage reduced by 20% on Mythic difficulty as well as Heartrend no longer applying Heart Hemorrhage to the player who dispelled the magic effect on Mythic. This is a major change. What used to happen, again, another one of these soak cheese mechanics, just like Sludge Fist, is that you would let Heartrend be cast on multiple people, you would let the dots keep ticking. The main issue is that when you dispel this in Mythic, the Dispeller would also gain Heart Hemorrhage. Heart Hemorrhage hits pretty hard. If you already get 2 on yourself at the same time, you actually have to use a defensive or even a health potion to stay alive. Again, like Sludge Fist, what people would do is, for example, drop an Ancestral Protection Totem, and then a priest would Mass Dispel, and then insta-die, and get then immediately rest by the totem. This was to avoid a heavy amount of dot healing that you were required to do for the Heartrends or for the Heart Hemorrhages, and now this is going to be made trivial, because there is no longer a need to use this type of cheese. You can simply Mass Dispel to your heart's content or single target Dispel and be done with this. You don't have to worry about Heart Hemorrhage on the Dispeller anymore. And then alleviating some of the focus on DPS burst, because the Volatile Stone Shell, the Absorb Shield before the explosion of the trash, has gotten decreased by 20%. So you won't need as much damage to break the shield. One of the bigger changes though, actually, is not going to be in terms of nerfs, in terms of health or damage. It's actually going to be the fact that General Khal and Grashal spell cooldowns now are going to be resetting every time a phase changes. This is going to be particularly good, because now you can't get screwed and you can't jumble the cooldowns and the order of abilities that are going to happen because you phased a boss at a certain percentage right before or right after he was supposed to cast something. Now, whenever they change phases, you always have the same order, the same bucket list of things happening from the next phase coming, because all of their abilities are going to reset anyways. This is going to make the fight much less chaotic, much less hectic and random, because every fight, every pull, you never know if you're going to hit a certain breakpoint in the phasing change, which is going to give you the same abilities of the last try, or maybe this pull, you did something different, so now you phase them at a different time, so now in the next phase, the order of abilities is different than the previous pull. So all of this is just grounds for way more confusion as you're trying to progress, and this change is very, very big to that end. So I think that, much like Dungeons, nice targeted nerfs to Necrotic Wake and specifically Sanguine Depths as well. In raids we get the same. Stone Legion Generals was definitely the biggest and more overtuned of the bosses. I am surprised though that it is Sludge Fist that was nerfed in Mythic. I thought that Council of Blood would have gotten nerfed before Sludge Fist. Clearly, in terms of progression, people have had more trouble with Council of Blood than Sludge Fist. So I was thinking something like the walls damage, the jumps damage being reduced a little bit, maybe help with the kiting of the gargoyle adds, maybe making them spawn a little bit less often, something along these lines. But instead Blizzard went to Sludge Fist. It would have been interesting to see or to learn about their thought process as to why Sludge Fist had to be nerfed. However, the rest of the changes are all very good. The more annoying dungeons have gotten nerfed, and the bigger cock block for raids, Stone Legion Generals, has gotten nerfed as well. So it is a positive set of changes. I still wonder, how did Domina make it unnerfed again? But for the rest, I think you have to be pretty happy with how this went down. We're going to go and see exactly how these changes are going to be affecting all these bosses getting nerfed this week with Tyrannical, and then we will report back. So with this, we can close this video of Raid and Dungeon tuning coming in this week. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, someone go and bring Domina to Blizzard.